I'm not that old. My question is not that.
Being called old, I mean, I got some gray. But
Here's the question from our audience member now.
You have a younger generation who feels isolated, who feels like they are being, excluded, or they don't have a seat at the table. How do you include them? Because if they see this tonight, it's like the same thing over and over.
Good question.
Because you're not on the front lines and they are. With the exception, again, of Attorney Crump.
Well, those young people really are the hope for America. And I thank you so much for that question, Lakeela, because I do think, Dr. Carson, they feel a lot of people speak up for the police and nobody speaks up for them. And so that's what they're frustrated about. And these young people, when we really think about it, they're the hope, because we're going to, as you said, we're going to be gone, and they're going to have a profound effect on what happens going forward, Fred, because if we don't include them, if we don't make them feel that they are important and they continue to be marginalized, we're going to see this happen over and over again. So when we get these thought leaders, we need to have a foundation of some sort where we have young people sitting at the table with police leaders, athletic league leaders, when we go into the community, to not only talk about sports, but to talk about education and what do I bring to the table? Why do you value me as a citizen? Because the question is, do some police officers have that culture sensitivity training where they do value young black and brown people and they don't look at them all as thugs? Because I will tell you, they have tests out there when they put up the images and they see how fast they shoot at black and brown figures versus what they shoot at white figures. And a lot of it is the media. Let's be honest about it. The negative portrayals of blacks and Hispanics are rampant, and we got to say, we got to stop that. We got to portray outstanding African Americans, outstanding Hispanic citizens, as much as we display all these negative images. And you know that better than anything, because you don't have to tell us. We see it every day we turn on the TV.
And Mr. Crump, if I could just add too, I don't know who it was among you, the panel, you made a great observation. We're not bashing the police force. We're not bashing law enforcement. We're questioning some of the systems, the grand jury systems and whatnot. Officers Wenjen Liu and Rafael Ramos were working overtime in Brooklyn, New York City at the end of last year when they were shot point blank in the head by a lone gunman, Ishmael Brinsley, 28, who killed himself at a train platform when he realized that the police were closing in on him. It turned out he also killed his girlfriend in Baltimore. They were killed because they were wearing police uniforms. They seem to have the same racial makeup as the neighborhood they were protecting. So I don't know whether that was an exceptional case or something that we also have to delve into and wonder, geez, do the police really have to look like the community they serve? I just wanted to bring that up because, and I'd love to hear from social media from any law enforcement official out there if they can give us an explanation, because we are trying to get closer to the truth.
Real quick,
we have another brave member of our audience. If you can come over here, please. What is your name?
Catherine Paul.
And where are you from, Catherine?
I'm from Darnestown, Maryland.
Okay, and your question?
Well, first I want to thank the panelists for being here. You just mentioned that our young people are our hope and our future, and my question is very simple. I'm a 21-year-old student at the University of Maryland, and I want to know, what's my role, what can I do, and what role do I play in this whole scope of race relations?
That's a very good question. Anyone want to take that? Dr. Carson?
Yeah, well, I think maybe begin to focus, particularly some of those young black males, on some very positive things. You know, there are more young black males involved in the penal system than there are in a higher education system. Enormous homicide rates, particularly in our major cities. But what if you, as a college student, took a 6-year-old black male by the hand and says, I'm going to walk down the streets of Baltimore and I'm going to give you a black history lesson that you will never forget. and you start out by pointing to his shoes, and you say, Jan Matzliger, a black man, invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, which revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. And you step on that clean street and you say it was Charles Brooks, a black man, who invented the automatic street sweepers. And down that street comes a big refrigerated tractor trailer truck, and you tell them it was Frederick Jones, a black man who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes and boats. And it comes to a stop at the red light. You tell them it was Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the traffic signal. And while you're talking about him, how he invented the gas mask, like saved lots of lives during the war. While you're talking about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And you'll see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use that opportunity. Talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion. First woman of any nationality to become a millionaire in the United States on her own efforts. And you walk past the hospital, and you'll talk about Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world. Operative mortality rate less than 1.5%. You look up at the surgical light, Thomas Edison, he wasn't black, but his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was, how he invented the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days. Invented the electric lamp, diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell. You walk past the railroad tracks, you talk about Andrew Beard, automatic railroad car coupler, spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. In fact, he had so many inventions, when something would come up, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? And you could go on and on and on. But my point being, let's change the focus a little bit and start making them think about what they can do, not what they can't do, not what all the injustices are. And I'm not saying that we should totally ignore injustices, but there are enormous opportunities, and we need to start focusing people on what those are and how they take advantage of them.
All right, I think it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah.
You got to say this.
You go ahead.
Well, and also be more proactive about what you see or read or hear on the radio. If you have a complaint or you don't like something, call up the TV station, call up the radio station, call up the newspapers. I mean, you know, there are people that work there, assignment editors, reporters, news directors, that don't hear enough from the community that they cover. And there are all kinds of stories out there, very positive stories, that no one ever hears about because, you know, if it's not something crazy, then no one's going to be interested. But people would be interested. They just don't hear enough from the community. So I would also suggest to be more proactive and talk to members of the media and go to these kinds of community forums.
That's a marvelous point. Yeah, it's a great point, because we had a member of our audience say, you don't have that person up there, you don't have that person up there, and we took the criticism, and we're still standing, and that's why we want to solve all these problems. Let's go back now to Jumi Olabanji, who is at our social media desk. I understand we are hearing from a lot of people nationwide. What are you hearing, Jumi?
Well, Jeff, we definitely are trying to keep up with all the questions right now. We have one that just came in within the past couple of minutes from @Starbuck, and he's asking our panel, how is it that we can really expect change when the reins of power predominantly reside in the hands of white America? So that's one question coming in from Twitter. We also just received this question from one of our other viewers across the nation.
Is the world more accepting to interracial children now?
All right, so you've got two questions there. Is the world more receptive to interracial children? And you've got this question, how can we expect change when this person says the reins of power predominantly reside in the hands of white America? Two questions from our viewers this evening, Jeff.
Jimmy, thanks so much. Let's go to Frederick Wilson on that. What do you think? What is your response on that? You were looking at me like, please don't ask me that, Jeff, which is why I asked you first.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and say what you just said.
Yeah, that's what we
to address
just all
both questions, last time I checked, we were talking about political power. The highest political office is held by an interracial child. So, one, yes, I think the world is more accepting of interracial children because they don't really have a choice. They're everywhere. I mean, it's not like you can be, if you take everybody that's interracial and put them over here, it's going to be a lot of people over there. And then as far as, why, the system of power in this country, well, everybody can get involved with government. Last time I checked, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no legislation that says only certain races, certain ethnicities, certain genders can hold office. Did I miss something? Everybody's allowed to get involved in government.
It's a deeper question there too, though, with voters' rights. It's interesting that we're here on the Martin Luther King Day, and we are still fighting a lot of the challenges that he led marches on across the bridge in Selma. When you really think about it, you have issues in Texas and other states all across America where voters feel disenfranchised. And we should, as America, as the great beacon of hope and justice and democracy, want everybody to vote. But we, in the court systems, as an officer of the court, I'm seeing a lot of people being turned away from the voters poll, and it is being legitimated. We gotta make sure, again, that everybody feels their voice is being heard, because if it's not, then you see what you saw in Ferguson and other places when people feel like they're marginalized and they're not a part of it. So I say we can't completely say everybody is getting a chance to participate unless we really let them participate. And don't take my word for it. Just look at all these court challenges where people want to vote. They really want to vote in our community, and we gotta let them and make it easy for them to vote, not make it more challenging for them to vote. That's not what America.
And maybe what would be good is if we focus on those people several months before the election,
Exactly.
rather than a couple of weeks before the election,
Exactly.
and get an army of people out there to get them to vote. In Ferguson, Missouri, 12% of eligible voters voted in the statewide election. Let's get people involved.
And you know what? I think there are certain things, Dr. Carson, that we gotta make sure everybody's pushing that rhetoric right now, because they're changing the laws. I mean, a lot of governors, and we know who the governors in America, they're signing legislation to say, oh, if you move, you can't go vote. And you say, hold on, why are you making it more restricted? Let's make it more easier to vote.
I think a lot of that happens is because people don't realize the rights that they have.
Exactly.
And so when you go to vote,
But why not? Why don't they realize the rights they have?
well, because a lot of they're not informed enough. They're not, you know, and a lot of times is like you were saying that, you know, people get to them 2 or 3 weeks before the elections and ask them, are you registered to vote? Are you going to go vote? When it should be way before that. I mean, I think it should be even in school. In elementary and middle school, so that by the time you reach the age that you can vote at 18, it becomes second nature. It's almost like getting a driver's license. That, you know, you can have mock elections in schools so that kids know this is what these are the things that you have to do in order to vote, so that it doesn't become something foreign and alien, and that when you do go to the voting booth and they say, you know, well, you just moved here, you can't vote. Well, you can say, you know what, that's not true. The law says X, Y, and Z.
Did their research.
And a lot of people don't realize that they have these resources.
Right.
And they also don't realize that there are a lot of lawyers, pro bono lawyers, during the elections that are right there to help them. But, you know, you have to be proactive about asking for help. And a lot of times people get frustrated and they say, well, forget this, I'm just going to go home. I mean, look at the midterm election results. We had so many people that that stayed home.
Yeah,
they didn't vote,
yeah.
Which is an unbelievably pathetic thing in this United States of America, that we have such a low percentage of people that are voting.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking just about the presidential or congressional elections.
No.
We're talking about state and local elections that actually have a greater impact on your life than the presidential or the congressional elections, and people don't realize. You need to get out there and participate.
Yeah, there are a lot of nations in this world that have no rights whatsoever, and we see
Absolutely.
these stacked
you know, and
elections
people
that are
died
nothing
for
more
this
than a
particular
joke.
right.
Right, exactly. A lot of
you know,
people have. A lot of my relatives have during the Second World War.
It's like where you trailed off, like,
It's
yeah,
good
people
to,
have to be proactive. Like,
be
as
educated.
Dr. Carson was saying, yeah, they wait till right before the elections to go out there and get the people. And it's like, don't wait for them to come to you and be like, are you registered to vote? You should be like, we all know what election season is. It's November. So when the election's coming up, like, okay, I registered last year. Let me go down and make sure that I'm still registered. Let me go down and make sure. Like, don't wait for the person to knock on your door,
Right.
you know, at the end of October and then be like, well, I think I'm registered. Like she's saying, you have to be proactive and go out there and make sure you know your
hold on.
rights
People
are.
die for this right to vote, but we also have to remember the Latino community has greatly been affected by these restricted voter ID rules. They're doing everything you said, and they get there. They say you don't have the right identification. It's crazy.
This is the bad thing
And-
about.
well,
Excuse me.
and
This is the bad thing about being in television. You have such a finite period of time. We've had a gentleman here who's been standing here, and we gave him 3 cups of coffee, and well, yeah. So right, exactly. See, it's already worn off. What is your name, sir?
My name is Achille West.
Okay, where are you from?
I'm from Washington, D.C.
And what's your question?
Well, I have a statement and a question. First of all, when we talk about voter apathy in this country, I think that a great deal of that comes from people voting for people or for parties based upon who their mother or father voted for or who they're supposed to vote for as an African American. But I don't think that there's a lot of research done as to why people, African Americans, if you will, vote a certain way. I did the research, and quite frankly, what I found out was that Dr. Martin Luther King was sitting in a prison cell after one of the marches and had reached out to both of the candidates, the presidential candidates at the time. He reached out to
Kennedy and Nixon?
No, this was at this time. This was Kennedy, and it was Goldwater.
Okay.
And no one in Goldwater.
Johnson Goldwater.
Right.
Yeah.
No one in Goldwater's office answered the phone. Somebody picked up the phone in Kennedy's office, made a call to the Attorney General, and had Dr. King released so that he could actually make it to one of his children's births. So, in the next election, he decided to vote Democrat, and millions of other black Americans voted Democrat for the first time. But nowhere in that do I think Dr. King intended for black Americans to vote Democrat for the next 100 years, or to not think independently, or for their vote to be taken for granted. Because since then, what's happened is that the Democratic Party hasn't had to do a thing for the black community, and we still give them our vote, whereas the Republicans don't feel like they can do a thing to get our vote, and so they don't try it. And who loses is the black, if you will, community. But then, to go back to this, what is the black community?
Okay, so get to the question.
Okay, well, let me just say that, first of all...
No, I know, you had the 3 cups of coffee. Okay. This is your fault.
My question is there a black community? I would say not. There's no such thing as a black community in this country, and I would like to hear from each of you all, because I see it as there's hard-working people who go out and work every day. There's communities of families. I represent my family, but what is the black community, and do we have an image problem in this country as it pertains to race?
All right, who wants to take that question first? Thank you very much for your question. Enjoy the coffee.
Well, I'll take a stab at it and simply say that I was doing an interview once in NPR, and the interviewer said, "Dr. Carson, why don't you talk about race very often?" And I said, "It's because I'm a neurosurgeon." And she thought that was a strange response. And I said, "You see, when I open somebody's head, I'm operating on the thing that makes them who they are." I said, the skin doesn't make them who they are. And I think we need to start being a little more deep in our thinking and not being so superficial, quite frankly. Is there such a thing as a black community? Is there such a thing as a white community? I never hear anybody talking about the white leader. Who's the white leader? You know, blacks are individuals with brains who can think for themselves also. And hopefully more and more will begin to start thinking about the things that Mr. West just talked about. Think about what is good for them, and how do they get the two parties to start fighting for their vote, rather than just taking it for granted or writing it off.
That's a good point. We have another question from an audience member. Hello, how are you, and what is your name?
My name is Kendra Brown. I'm from Catonsville, Maryland.
All right, Catonsville, not far from where I live. All right, now what is your question?
My question is, what is the specific role of legislators in this process as it pertains to race? What can legislators do at the state and at the national level to really help this issue?
And as a follow-up, isn't President Barack Obama right now, doesn't he have a 90-day task force? He's looking into something like this. Okay, who would like to take that question?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I think legislators have an important role when they have the pulpit and the platform per se, but also, if you're looking at the congressional leaders, they get to vote on the budgets. They get to decide the purse strings, and so take, for instance, video body cameras. If they wanted video body cameras on police officers in different municipalities, they'll simply say, hey, we're going to insist that you all get the video body cameras. We're going to help you with some of the funding, but you're going to do some of the funding as well because it's important to your community, it's important to America, and if not, we're going to look at how much funding you get versus people who are going to go do this important function for their communities that we all agree is a good idea. So legislators have a very important role. State legislators, man, they're very powerful. When you think about Missouri and New York, those folks can influence the governor of those states to talk about special prosecutors, to talk about bringing in independent.
So bring in the federal and the state levels, and that would help. I want to go to social media one more time. This has been a really fast few minutes, but a very interesting one. We want to toss it over now to Jumi Olabanji in our newsroom now for the very latest on what's going on in our social media. What are you finding out, Jumi?
Well, Jeff, we're getting a lot of questions, but we're also getting a lot of comments this evening. This one coming in from Bruce Parham, watching us in Virginia. He simply says, change only comes with economic power. So a question might be for our panel this evening, how important is economic prosperity, and what is a socioeconomic kind of status? How does that play into all of this?
Critical.
That's a very good question, and quite obviously anyone can chime in on this, but you have to be brief because I have one more audience member who's just itching to ask all four of you a question.
I'm going to be real brief. Just to respond to the last part of the thing, I was very interested that Senator Rand Paul came to Ferguson, and I think legislators and Congress folks have a big part and a big say using their platform just by doing simple things like showing up and saying there's a problem. We got to work to the solution. Economics, I said it before, education, economics, and election. And John Johnson, the founder of Ebony Magazine, I thought said it better than anything else. He said, the best civil rights bill I've ever seen in my life is the dollar bill.
All right, and Frederick, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this? You keep looking at me as though you don't want me to ask you a question.
Now, to go back a little bit, when we were talking, when she asked about what legislators can do, another thing I want to address is also the people. Like, you see what can happen when we get outraged about things. What do we get outraged about? Our black men being shot and killed in the streets. Why don't we get that same type of outrage about the condition of our schools? About, the fact that in poorer neighborhoods they're not getting the same type of resources. Where's the outrage for that? Now, I'm not out there advocating civil disobedience and going out there rioting and turning over cars, but the same type of outrage, the same type of sweeping momentum, that is the reason why we're all sitting here right now. I mean, with the situation with Michael Brown, that could have just been another person, another homicide, swept on the rug, Eric Garner. But we brought attention to it, we brought outrage to it, something's being done about it. At the very least, we're all sitting here talking about it. So again, where's that same outrage with other aspects? Why does somebody have to die for us to be outraged?
Dr. Carson, what is your response to this economic question?
Economics is extraordinarily important. And I think the first thing that we need to do is everything we can to create an economic environment that allows our economy to explode. That means fixing the tax structures. That means important regulations, but getting rid of non-important regulations that depress people. And when we get the economy fixed, and there are good jobs available, I'm not talking about 30-hour-a-week jobs with no benefits. I'm talking about the kind of jobs that will allow people's income to expand. Only at that point will people have real choice, and at that point we can start talking about entitlement reform.
Agreed. Patricia, we have about 30 seconds for you to answer that question.
Well, I go back to what I said before about getting involved and, taking advantage of the fact that you don't have to be physically present somewhere to get involved. And as long as you have a laptop and an internet connection, you can find out what's going on in Congress. You can find out what's going on in your city hall if you can't get down there yourself. And use that power of internet communications to talk about the issues that you want discussed, because if you don't say anything, they're not going to know. It's like that old saying, if a tree falls in the forest, who hears it? Well, it's basically the same thing.
All right, talking about young people, students from Watkins Elementary School in Northeast D.C. had a special opportunity to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. last week. They read King's famous I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Caroline Tucker was there.
I have a dream that one day
this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream, and now these 5th graders from Watkins Elementary do too.
They will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day...
They know the footsteps they stand in.
It was an honor because he was one of the greatest people in the history of our nation.
It was a defining moment in the American Civil Rights Movement.
No, we're not satisfied. We will not be satisfied.
I kind of felt the speech because a long time ago, my grandpa, he heard it, so he told me a lot about Martin Luther King.
More than 50 years later, this speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial still has meaning.
It means to me that he wanted there to be a time when African Americans and Caucasian people could be together. It means to me is like to be free.
At this Capitol Hill school, children of all races sit side by side, and they thank Dr. King.
It means a lot to me because now I get to be with the people I'm with, and if I wasn't with them, my life would be totally different.
It was amazing. I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I was glad that I was a part of it.
Martin Luther King Jr. may be just a memory, but his dream continues to live on through a new generation. At the Lincoln Memorial, Caroline Tucker, News Channel 8.
200,000 people, witnesses to history on that day in August, way back when in 1963. That's all the time we have for tonight. I'm Jeff Barn. Thanks so much for joining us. However, we will continue streaming. This isn't over, folks. Nobody's moving. The audience is here. The panel is here. If you have any questions, we'll be right here, and you can reach us online at this site, WJLA.com. Have a great night, everybody. Welcome back now to our town hall meeting. Your voice, your future, race relations moving beyond. We just were on TV for an hour. We are now streaming because we have so many good questions to give you, and our panel is so nice to stick around a little longer. Can we have a big hand for our panel, please? All right, let's bring our first audience member up. You've been very patient. Thanks so much. What is your name, sir?
Colenberg.
Yeah, move over here a little bit more. The lighting is so much better, Colin. All right. Where are you from?
I'm from Greenbelt, Maryland.
Okay, and what is your question?
This question is specifically directed to you, Dr. Benjamin Carson. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Understood clearly the relationship between politics and racial justice. A lot of people remember him for his I Have a Dream speech, but there were two very specific, tangible political results of that speech. First, the Voting Rights Act of 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was kind of depicted in the recent film Selma. My question to you is, since his death, of course, you had the election of the first black president, Barack Obama. How do you think Martin Luther King Jr. would evaluate and feel about Barack Obama's presidency, number one? And number two, what do you think, and this is a tough one, what do you think would be his two biggest criticisms of the Republican Party's approach to racial inequality in America right now?
Well, I suspect his biggest criticisms would be that they have not really reached out very much. And I think probably his second criticism of the Republican Party is that they don't talk about what they've done. They don't talk about the fact that the Republican Party was established as the abolition party. They don't talk about the fact that the Republican Party was the one who advocated for freedmen to have guns, because KKK was coming along trying to mow them down, and they were trying to keep blacks from having guns. They don't talk about the fact that one of the things that you just mentioned, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, was pushed through by Republicans against great Democratic opposition. They don't talk about the fact that Frederick Douglass was a Republican, that Booker T. Washington was a Republican, George Washington Carver was a Republican, Martin Luther King Sr. was a Republican, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. And I would say, he would probably say, why don't you guys talk about this stuff, talk about what you're doing, and why don't you be more proactive in terms of reaching out? And I think those would be legitimate criticisms, and hopefully the Republican Party would take that to heart. And the first part of the question?
The second part, I believe, were what are the two major criticisms of the...
So that was the second part. The first part was, how do you think he would feel about and evaluate Barack Obama's presidency?
Well, I think probably like most of America, me included, everybody was proud of the fact that we as a nation were able to put race behind us and elect an African American. In terms of what Dr. King advocated, opportunity, personal responsibility, self-sufficiency, there could potentially be some conflict there. But let's keep it positive.
Okay. We have another audience question here. What is your name, sir?
My name is Maurice Snake.
And where are you from?
I'm from Upper Marlboro, Maryland.
All right. And what is your question tonight for our panel?
My question is, I was really enthused and I watched the funeral services of both of the officers in New York. And I thought it was absolutely amazing by all the officers and the community members that came out, as well as the businesses that provided pro bono services to get them there. But then again, I was equally astonished at the fact that a lot of the officers turned their back while the mayor was talking. Now, do you believe the mayor was courageous or incorrect in his statements? And based on that answer, what does that have to say for other public elected officials and their First Amendment right?